Have you ever asked yourself why God did not accept Cain's offering? Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, October 31st, 2025. One of the most ancient stories and most poignant in the Bible is the story of Cain and Abel. It touches a deep, deep nerve because we can all identify with Cain at some level. Perhaps we haven't ever had the same level of anger and resentment toward a sibling as Cain had for Abel, but at some point, we've all been jealous of someone else's achievement or recognition. And in our darker moments, we have even thought ill of someone as a result of our own feelings of resentment. This story has enough moving parts that one devotional cannot possibly get at it all. So I'm going to break it into 4 parts, one for each of the next 4 days. The story itself is simple enough, and you can read the whole thing in a couple of minutes. But here's the first part of the story, the setup, if you will. It reads, "Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel for his part brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it.'" So, even in this part of the story, there is enough to wrestle with for hours on end. There's the command at the end, you must master it, meaning sin. There is the difference between Cain's and Abel's work and each other's offerings. There is the description of Cain's face when his offering is rejected, that it falls. But what really gets our attention is the question, why didn't God accept Cain's offering? Nowhere in this passage is the question answered. Commentators over the centuries have tried to moralize about it by saying that Cain had some moral defect that caused God to reject his offering. This was John Calvin's interpretation, for example. But as Walter Brueggemann points out, this explanation goes beyond what the Bible itself says. Scripture says nothing about why God rejects Cain's offering. And that galls us. If we focus on it, it irritates us like a tiny rock in our shoe. The temptation is to try to justify God's choice, to give a reason why God accepts Abel's but not Cain's offering, so that we can defend God's action. But try as we might to justify God's action, there simply is no answer offered. It simply is. In fact, I suspect it's just the setup for the story and not meant to be the focus. It's really nothing more than a plot device to propel us into the story of one brother's jealousy of the other. But it still rankles us. So the fact of the matter is that there is no deep theological meaning to be attached to this part of the story. It's not really a commentary on God or on God's character. I suspect the original listeners would not have worried about it, and that the writer uses it simply to introduce the real point of the story, which we'll get to starting tomorrow. But just because there's no deep theological meaning to God's rejection of Cain's offering, there is still a lesson to be learned, and that is, not everything in life is fair. We all know that. It is simply a fact of human existence. We teach our children that life's not fair, but they, and we, still want it to be fair. And while it is no excuse for treating people unfairly, to expect everything in life will always be fair is asking way too much of life. The relevant fact here is that, like us, Cain cannot accept this unfairness, and he reacts in anger. But notice something important here, and this is the point. There is nothing in the story to indicate Abel treated Cain unfairly. It is God who treats Cain unfairly. But as we already know, Cain doesn't seek retribution against God. He seeks it through violence against his brother. This story resonates so deeply with us because of its focus on sibling rivalry, on parental rejection and favoritism, on the dynamics of fairness and unfairness, and on the irrationality of anger. Rejection, jealousy, misplaced anger, and in the next portion of the story, murder. This is the stuff of real life, and we see it played out every day in our families and in our news feeds. The question is, when life treats us unfairly, do we react in anger and lash out at others? It's what Cain does. Perhaps an even more important question for us today, though, is, when life is unfair to our neighbor, do we seek to make things right? Today, a cautionary tale. Tomorrow, we'll take up the matter of Cain's crime and God's question to him. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.